Chapter 21 of The Man with the Red Beard by David Whitelaw. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne. The Mercury Report. As I passed through the glass-panelled door leading to Winston's room, and he switched up the lights in their business-like green shades, I felt the spirit of the journalist strong upon me. There is, perhaps, no greater delight in the world than that which your real newspaper man feels as he takes his seat at his desk with a good story bubbling in his brain. The hour is usually late. Above him, perhaps, he hears the rattle of the linotype machines as they eat up the copy page by page as he scribbles it. Below, there is the muffled roar of the giant presses at work on the earlier editions. There is a behind-the-scenes sensation that is very gratifying, the feeling that the world is sleeping, to wake in a few hours to the news that he is preparing for it. The earlier editions of the Mercury had been passed by the time we arrived at the offices, and Winston decided, after a moment's deliberation, not to have the machine stopped for the article I was about to write. "Here you are, Sammy," he said, pushing me into a swivel chair at his own desk and putting paper before me. "As hot as you can, old man, both for my sake and the dear old Mercury's." I was really sorry for Winston. After all, I was not going to give him much more, if any, than could the reporters who had been at the scene of the crime. I sat for a moment quite unable to start. I could see eye to eye with my partner where the paper was concerned. I knew that if I wrote all I knew, the circulation and reputation of the Mercury would touch a record figure, whilst the controversy my exposure would cause would keep our machines at top speeds for many weeks to come. But I also knew that the girl I hoped to make my wife would be enmeshed in the downfall of the gang if by anything I said the house at Norwood should come under suspicion. I gathered by my week in the billiard-room that Myra did not visit the place very often, but there would be papers, letters. I saw Winston eyeing me anxiously as I sat pencil in hand. He had sunk into his leather armchair and was biting through an unlit cigar. A bundle of galley proofs were in his hands, but he was not reading. Only over the top of them he was watching for me to begin. I wrote for perhaps half an hour, then leant back for a breather and a cigarette. Winston, who had been taking each sheet as I finished it and reading it, was, I think, pleased so far. "This is for the last edition only?" I asked, glancing at the clock. "Rather. I've sent up word that I'll make it up myself, double column, page 3. How on earth did you know all about this affair in Moscow? It seems to carry conviction with it." I smiled across at my partner. "Because, Winston, I was there when the raid took place, and I was speaking with the man who shot himself this evening on the balcony overlooking the park only a week ago." Winston groaned. "Seems a shame you can't tell us more, but I'll be content. Fire away." And he touched a bell button to have the last of what I had written sent up to the linotypes. In another quarter of an hour I had done, and while Winston was reading the last of it, I crossed over to a locker where I knew, of old, was kept whiskey and a siphon or two. For a little while we sipped and discussed the crime that had been perpetrated that evening. Then a summons came calling Winston to the making up of the last edition of the Mercury. I rose and put on my coat. "Look here, Winston," I said. "I've done what you wanted as well as I was able to. What it may mean to me I don't know yet. There may be inquiries here about it from the police, or others. Say nothing. If you must answer, say the copy was left anonymously by a foreign gentleman, whom you have not been able to trace. Good night." I passed out down the silent corridors into the well-lit courtyard of the building. The windows of the publishing office made a line of radiance on one side, and under the cold glare of a huge arc lamp the carts were piling up the earlier editions of the paper, rattling away when full to the termini, to make way for others who in their turn filled up and followed. I stood smoking for a moment, watching the animation and enjoying the fascination such a scene holds for one who loves newspaper work. Then I made my way out into Fleet Street. I walked slowly through Chancery Lane on my way to the hotel, enjoying the soft air of the summer night, and running over in my mind the events of the last few hours. Now that I was alone, conclusions, which had been hazily floating through my mind, took definite shape. When Winston had told me in the cab of the scene of the crime, how the burglars had been surprised, and of the fight that had taken place when the men were held at bay on the balcony, I had seen at once that this was not the work of an ordinary housebreakers. There had been 2 policemen seriously wounded, and in the end the man who had fired the shots turned the revolver on himself. The revolver was of a magazine pattern I have seen frequently in Russia, and not one that was likely to be in the possession of an English burglar. Besides, my knowledge of ordinary housebreakers told me that not once in 20 cases do they shoot. In fact, the majority of those who go a-burgling refuse to allow themselves the possession of a revolver, well knowing what it means if, in the heat of the moment, they are tempted to use it. But I knew that in Russia and in other continental cities such affairs as that which had taken place in the West End that night were of frequent occurrence. This, together with the type of revolver used and the suicide of the man on the balcony, a foreigner, meant for me but one thing: expropriation. Besides, a reporter had described to Winson the appearance of the man, thick-set and with a long wave of black hair across his forehead. There was no doubt in my mind as to the house where the expropriation of the Azov diamond had been discussed and plans formulated. Little wonder that I had not been asked to take part in the deliberations of the men at Clarina Villa. In my article I had been purposely vague. I did not think that with the time at the other reporters' disposal they would have been able to see what I saw. I had referred to the raid of the flat in Moscow in detail, and to the number of dangerous criminals who had immediately afterwards left the Russian city and landed in England. I brought up the affair of Paul Bergstoff, of the first expropriation of the Azov, and of how this man had been a member of the Moscow organization. Here, as in my description of the Moscow raid, I wrote from first-hand knowledge. I had made it clear, I thought, that the affair had been engineered in England, probably in London, but I had given no clue. When the article appeared in the morning the world would have something to talk about. I knew that what I had written carried conviction. Even Winson had been pleased, and had begged me with tears in his eyes to cut adrift from the dangerous people he saw I was associated with. Well, so I would, but not until Myra Ramsay was out of the fire as well. I knew the binding nature of the oaths she had taken, and I knew her too well not to think she now regretted them. It was one thing to be in sympathy with the intellectuals I had known in Moscow, men and women of the highest ideals; another thing altogether to associate with such criminals as the man who now lay dead in his sins, a man who under the cloak of anarchy plundered and murdered, not, I imagined, for the cause so much as for himself. It was men like Merezeff and Dr. Muradan who, I said, played on the feelings of these dangerous aliens. How much, I wondered, of the proceeds of the Azov would have gone to the regeneration of Russia had the coup at Park Lane been successful, and how much into the pockets of the doctor and Felix Merezeff? I had, so to speak, fired the first shot, in the article I had written. In the morning I would send a note to Myra asking her to be at the horse pond on Hampstead Heath at 9 in the evening to meet one who had news for her of Samuel Mannering. Once I could release the girl from the net in which she had placed herself, I would attend to Felix Merezeff. After that, Winson and the Mercury could do what they liked with the house at Norwood, and all it contained. End of chapter 21.